Thank you everyone for joining us on this late afternoon or evening. This is the third annual ASDP Dermatopathology Fellowship Forum. This is where you get to learn everything you want to know, or maybe you didn't want to know about the dermatopathology fellowship process, everything from what the fellowships entail, what the interview process is like, and what the day-to-day is like. I'm really excited. We have a great panel and a great group of people for this discussion today. So who are your course directors? I'm Alex Flam. I am the Dermatology Residency Program Director and the DermPath Fellowship Director over at NYU. Your course co-directors and moderators for this evening will also be Catherine Chung over at Ohio State, and she's also the DermPath Fellowship Program Director, and then Rachel Koal, who is at Indiana University as well. So who else is on our panel? So representing our fellowship directors today, two fantastic fellowship directors who do so much for the ASDP. So first off is Jane Messina, who is Vice Chair of Anatomic Pathology at Moffitt Cancer Center. She is also DermPath Fellowship Program Director there. And also importantly, she is one of the co-chairs of the Dermatopathology Fellowship group in the ASDP, so really knows the ins and the outs of what's going on with dermatopathology fellowship applications in the process. And then we also have Tammy Farringer, section head and dermatopathology fellowship director at Geisinger, and our current ASDP president as well. So great group. Now, what about for our young dermatopathologists? So we have Adil Ahmed. So he's the director of dermatopathology at the Illinois Dermatology Institute and assistant professor of pathology and laboratory medicine at Loyola Stritch. And then Carly Whittington, who's an assistant professor of pathology and dermatology at Indiana University. And then in terms of our dermatopathology fellows, two excellent fellows, Shadi Khalil, who is our DermPath fellow at NYU, and Pippa Lee, who is the DermPath fellow at University of South Florida. So before we get started, a few things to keep in mind. So in terms of the Q&A, please put all of your Q&A into the Q&A box. Please use the chat for any technical issues you may have. We will get to Q&A at the end of all of our pre-planned Q&A. So I promise we see them, we'll get to them. We will try to get to as many as we can. I hope we can get to all of them. I apologize if we can't. We'll try to follow up with additional information if we have to. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. But before we get started, I also want to say a really big thank you to our ASDP staff who helped put this together. In particular, Leah Smith, who is here, though I know she is not on camera right now. Without her and our staff, this would not have happened at all. So with that, let's begin. I'm going to have Catherine Chung start our first part of the questions.
Awesome. I love doing this. So much fun. All right. Thanks, Alex, for a great introduction. We're going to just kind of kick off with an overview of the year, or in occasional instances, multiple years of dermatopathology fellowship training. So I thought maybe Dr. Messina, you could kind of go over what to expect in terms of how long a dermatopathology fellowship training year entails, and kind of the requirements that are expected during that time.
Okay, great. That's an easy one, thanks. So everybody knows it's DermPath Fellowship is typically a year, 12 months of education, which is focused and mandated by the ACGME is required. Some fellowships add an extra year for research, which is at the discretion of the program and obviously, requires extra funding and stuff. But they're all 12 years. And your second question was the requirements?
Yes, the requirements during that year.
Okay, well, so the year is kind of broken up into two main parts. The first 4 months, fellows, irrespective of their pathology or dermatology background, will spend all their time in dermatopathology, sign out every single day, morning and night, morning and afternoon. In the second 8 months, it's divided based on what your specialty is. So if you're path trained, you spend half your time doing derm path and half your time in the clinic seeing patients. The requirements have been recently modified so that 500 patient encounters in general are expected. The way this is divided up, whether it's daily, half day, whatever, is at the discretion of the program director, although derm path is expected to be sort of continually read throughout those 8 months. If you're derm trained, you spend half your time experiencing pathology from the surgical pathology and cytopathology standpoint as it pertains to the practice of dermatopathology.
Perfect. I think this is like a good opportunity to hear from our panelists who are current fellows. Let's start with you, Dr. Khalil. Could you kind of go over your background and kind of what your year up to this point has entailed in terms of how you divide your time in between things?
Yeah, of course. So kind of as was just mentioned, for 4 months out of the year, I did full-time dermatopathology, and then the other 8 months are split where in my particular case, in the mornings, I do dermatopathology sign out, and it works really well with the workflow of the dermatopathology lab since we get so many of the cases in the mornings. And then in the afternoons, I go to specific surge path and pathology subspecialties, and again, extremely relevant to dermatopathology. So this year I did some time on molecular, oral pathology, bone and soft tissue, hematopathology in the afternoons, GYN, with a focus on vulvar lesions. So basically a lot of just routine sign out, and as part of my elective blocks on pathology, doing a lot of the teaching boxes and getting kind of really specific teaching geared towards dermatopathology for me.
Awesome. How about you, Dr. Lee? What's your year and kind of day-to-day time split look like?
So I mirror Dr. Khalil in the fact that I'm pathology trained. So we kind of like switch around. When I first started fellowship, we kind of do a little bit of clinic to kind of get me used to seeing patients again, because I haven't done that in 5 years. And then most of it at the beginning is doing derm path, and then towards the latter half or the latter 8 months of the year, I spend like 2 to 3 days a week in clinic, and that involves seeing patients in specialty clinic, including the CTCL clinic that we have here at Moffitt, and then the rest of the time I'm reading slides.
Very cool. Dr. Farringer, how are things done at your program, just to give us an idea of, you know, the different ways that this can be approached?
Yeah, we have 4 months out of the year, they're all derm path, and then the other 8 months, similarly, is split up. Our mornings are usually whatever their opposite of their training is, and then the afternoons are sign out. And we usually do, 3 hours, maybe something like that. In the mornings, we often have our derm path conferences in the mornings as well. And then, for our derm train, right now we have 2 derm trained people. So they both spend some time in the morning with the surge path folks. And as you all have said, trying to make it as focused and as relevant as we possibly can for molecular, for oral, for gyne, soft tissue, those kind of things in the morning. But yeah, sounds like it's very similar to others.
Yeah, Dr. Whittington or Dr. Ahmed, did you have any kind of a different experience, or were they essentially similar?
I think it was kind of similar. I was PAT trained, so in the morning we would do sign out, in the afternoon we would do clinics, and in the evening we would do consult service. So back to sign out and like completing all the cases. So, yeah.
So I'm derm trained, and I just tried to soak up as much as I could from path. And I even actually took some time out to go through the lab and see how things are grossed and how things are put through the slide stainer and everything, because as a dermatology resident, we don't get exposure to that. But understanding how, pathology trained docs, you know how to gross, you know how everything is sectioned and put on slides, but derm residents don't. So taking time to understand that to kind of troubleshoot later was really helpful. So also that and everything else everyone said.
Great. I'm going to kick this back to Dr. Messina and kind of ask you, are there any anticipated changes in terms of ACGME requirements or what we might expect in that regard?
Not that I know of, but there were some very recent changes in ACGME requirements that became effective. Oh, Tammy, don't ding me on
This
this.
year,
The
this year.
2023 for the
Yeah,
at the
this year.
beginning of this year, in that they actually reduced both the for path trained residents the number of patient encounters, and for derm trained residents the number of surgical pathology specimens that are required to be examined. Those were the major change. That was the major change that affects trainees.
Okay,
And really it's also more like a logical focus, especially for I loved what Carly said about um doing stuff that was relevant to pathology. It's stuff that's stuff in general pathology that's relevant to the practice of derm path, and whatever that is that your practice is going to be, if it's going to require lab management, or you have cases that you get from an oculoplastic surgeon, see those cases.
Just two comments. I would mention that yes, I agree. Carly made a really good point, because that is the key part of it, I think, is seeing how the lab works for the derm trained person. You know, we don't have exposure to that. Try to make sure our residents even get to see that now. Our derm residents get to see that now, because they don't understand what happens behind the curtain either. And it's important, because that can be where things go wrong and how they can help the people in the grocers and things to make the best for the patient. The other comment I'd say is the decreasing the numbers of the patients and the surge path and cyto specimens that are required. I was on the RRC whenever they were making these changes, and the purpose of that was to have value rather than to have the numbers, because in the past it was 1,000 patients and it was 1,000 surge path and 200 cytopath specimens, and that often the only time you could fit that in was to see 100 GI polyps that you could see like really fast, and that's useless, to our derm path people. So it really was meant to be, okay, we really want you to see quality cases in those timeframes, and that's why the numbers were decreased.
Yes, I can say as a program director, I thought it was a great change to help trainees kind of focus on what is relevant to them. And the trainees are also very grateful for not having, if you're a dermatology trained, not having to see 250 cyto specimens. And I think rumor has it, not that long before I did fellowship, you had to do 10 autopsies if you were dermatology trained. So many changes for the better over time. I think I'm going to wrap up this session by hearing from some of our more recent fellow graduates, and kind of want you to think back, Dr. Whittington, Dr. Ahmed, about how you were able to incorporate teaching and research into your year, because that's a common question that comes up with applicants, and what to expect with that regard.
I think during the first quarter of fellowship, you have relatively more time. At least when I started my fellowship, our clinics started in the second quarter, or at least the later half of the first quarter. So try to squeeze as much research project, especially with the SDP deadlines are usually in the August for fellows. So try to do those projects as early as possible. Even before the fellowship, you can start talking with your program director and talk about the potential projects that you want to do. Teaching is an ongoing thing. We were teaching dermatology residents, pathology residents on the scope. So that's something you have to incorporate during the fellowship throughout the year. There's no run away from that.
Yeah, I'm sure every program is structured just a little bit in terms of when teaching takes place and how hands-on or hands-off people are. During my fellowship, we had it sprinkled throughout. In terms of research, I think, at least for me in the program I was at, I think making sure that you're focusing on the right thing first. So just making sure that you're focusing on learning what you need to learn, because you only have a year. And I always thought a year, it went by so fast. So learning what you have to know, because you will be the only person wherever you end up, you'll have to be able to sign it out because your name will be on the report. So focusing on the stuff that's really important, the knowledge, getting through your cases, and then incorporating, once you get more efficient, research projects and continue teaching. But that's just a takeaway, because it's easy to get involved in too many research projects. Like, I'm a yes person. It's really hard to say no sometimes, but you have to remember that you're only there for a year in most places, and you just got to focus on what you need to know.
Yeah, fantastic advice. Great. We're going to switch our focus a little bit from kind of the requirements of the year and what makes up the fellowship year to kind of the application and selection process, as well as the timeline. So I think I'm going to turn to Drs. Farringer and Messina to kind of walk us through this part, kind of what to expect in terms of when do fellowship applications open, and the interview timeline, and how that goes.
Okay, I can start this, and Tammy, please, I'm gonna liberally call on you. So I don't know how many of you are path trained and derm trained. But if you're path trained and you had the experience of applying for any other fellowships, you've known that the process for applying and interviewing and sort of selecting your program has been in a little bit of flux the last few years as all the programs have worked together to try to get all the applications on a similar timeline, which is much more sane for applicants. And that's met with some mixed success. We've actually had a couple of pathology subspecialty programs go to a match, but dermatopathology has not as of yet, although we are in the process of trying to accomplish that for not this coming interview season, but the following one. So the application timeline for DermPath specifically for next year is at the discretion of DermPath programs. We do have a timeline that programs can offer where the applications start July 1st and the first offer date is October 7th. And the participating programs are going to be listed on the ASDP website. I checked right before this conference, and they're not all up yet. We recently pulled programs, and I believe they're being updated like currently. So that opens up July 1st, 2024. One thing that that will be a probable benefit of a match, which would most likely be the NRMP match, is that the date of offer of the match would not be so far ahead of the beginning of your fellowship as it is now. I mean, for y'all that are thinking about applying for DermPath when you're done, that's PGY3, rising PGY3s in pathology, rising PGY2s in dermatology. You're young. You've barely had time to, burnish your CVs. If we go to a match, the match date will be more like 15 months instead of 24 months ahead of your start date. Tammy, what did I miss?
Oh, I think you got it perfect. I was hoping you had those exact dates in front of you because I didn't have those dates in front of me from the timeline. So thank you. I have to thank Jane and Sarah Shalin and several others have been working on this. Literally, I've been a fellowship director, I don't know, 15 years, something like that. And every year we've tried to do, closer to a match. And I think we're really, really almost there, So this year, we've had the timeline for the last 3 years, I think it has been now, that 5. Has it been that many? Okay, time flies.
Um,
That, many of the programs have agreed to abide to. There's, we don't, you're still abiding if you take your internal candidates and kind of decide ahead of time, that's still fine. But yeah, so that we're sticking to the timeline. And now that you mentioned that, Jane, I'm not even sure that I have I don't know if I needed to sign up someplace or where to say that we're participating, but we are.
you're signed up.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I think, it will be wonderful when we do have a match, just for you, what you said. We have a lot of difficulty, I think, with especially dermatology residents, because they're only a year into training, and a lot of programs, you don't get much exposure to derm path in your first year, or at least not what is life like as a dermatopathologist and sign out. You might have it in your didactics as far as, learning what it looks like under the microscope, a classic perfect case of whatever, but not what it's like to sign out cases on a day-to-day basis and try to deal with things that are, the difficult things. So yeah, I don't have anything else to add.
With you participating in the standard timeline, Tammy, when do you kind of review the applications and kind of start doing your interviews?
Yeah, so in the past, I was just looking at our website and I need to update it, but it was in July that we would have, I think it was towards the end of July we had as our cutoff for the last of the applications to come in, and there'd be a few stragglers. I don't recommend doing that. Try to avoid being a straggler at all possible if you can. I know you can't control all your letters, you can only do the best begging you can, but at least your part of it, make sure it's all completed on time, whatever that is. And some people's timelines are going to be different depending on what the program actually is. But it's a lot to go through them. I like to go through them all myself, and I kind of bring them down to the top 20 or something like that. And then often I'll even talk to the top 15 or 20 and then bring that down to 10. And then the rest of my staff will all the other derm path faculty will get to talk with all of those candidates or the top 10. And then we rank them and kind of bring it down from there. So all that process, takes a good while. And for me to get through all of those. So I like to start looking at them in August, early August. I'm going to be really starting to try to get through them the first time through.
Jane, are you pretty much the same, or do things a little bit differently?
We have been in a tear of having really great internal applicants. So we did participate in the timeline until we started to get a run of amazing internal applicants.
Yeah. Great. So other questions. I kind of wanted to bring it to our current fellows. Maybe start with Dr. Khalil, but if you could if you remember, your application process and what that was like on your end, and kind of when you started to get interview, invitations, and how that kind of worked out.
Yeah. Well, this was before I think the programs had agreed to the normal timeline. And so I remember in terms of after I submitted my application, I had a very bizarre experience, which I will communicate in a minute. But leading up to that, I was a first-year derm resident. I realized that I liked dermatopathology. I realized that that was something I was interested in. Probably about around January of my first year is where I maybe started to think, okay, I need to apply for dermatopathology fellowship if I want to be in sync for my training, because it's 2 years out from when you graduate that you have to apply. And I still didn't know my basal from my tricoep. But I had to kind of make the decision that I wanted to do dermatopathology. I had to start putting together research projects, and I started working on stuff that I ended up submitting to the ASDP as an abstract. I started putting my application together, getting letters of recommendation, and then I want to say around June was when some of the first applications were due. There were maybe 1 or 2 programs that actually opened up their application cycle in June. I think then a number more opened up in July. And then what ended up happening was one or two programs went rogue and interviewed me early. And I think NYU at this point is now on the normal cycle, is my understanding, but at the time was not. And so I received an offer to come and do fellowship here pretty early on from here and from some other programs. And then I made the decision to come here. Yeah, it's a little bit awkward being on a different timing cycle. So I think having the programs be all on the same cycle is going to make it a much better experience, I think, for all the applicants. So I have high hopes for this change.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. How about you, Dr. Lee? If you would care to share kind of your application process and how that went.
I had a very similar experience. I think I sent out the first of my applications around June, July. And then I think luckily for me, most of my writers actually got my letters out pretty quickly. And then I think I started getting interviews like kind of early as well. And then I had an interview that was like also on the trailing end, like literally after I had accepted, I was still getting like interviews. So it was, it spanned like a large several months period of time.
Yeah, so so hopefully everyone is hearing why the, kind of a unified timeline and hopefully a move toward the match would really be beneficial to everyone. But with that, I'm going to hand things off to Dr. Cowell and for the next sections.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for attending. Drs. Farringer and Messina, thank you so much, and to all our other panelists for being here. I wanted to move into talking a little bit more about the interview process, the actual interview. And so, with COVID, everything became virtual, and I kind of wanted just to know, maybe just share sort of like at this point in time, since we're, mostly beyond the COVID time period, how does a normal interview day work for you? Are you all still virtual, or do you do in person and virtual, or how does that go for you?
I mean, I can start. We did virtual interviews starting with COVID and have no plans to go back. I think you get more applications that way. You do more interviews that way. It's 2 days. It's really, really busy, but it's much more democratic process, I think. And you know what? Our fellows have been just as great with virtual interviews as they were before. I feel we're a well-oiled machine. We can pick them just as well live. Look at Pippa. That we did our interviews over 2 days and made a very fancy Zoom format and interviewed if like 2 faculty would interview 1 fellow so that all of the faculty would get to meet everyone. We'd vote afterwards. Rank, everybody would basically get a number based on their position on the list, and the person with the highest number was given the offer.
Yeah, ours is in the past, what we would do is have somebody come and spend the day with us. And in the morning, they would have like 15, 20 minutes with each one of the DermPath faculty one-on-one to kind of just interview and discuss, talk. Then the afternoon, they would have like I would sit down with them and talk through what our program is basically like. And then they would sign out, basically sit in on sign out with one of the fellows or residents just to see what is it like, for us to actually do this. And that's what I miss. That's the part I miss. I mean, the virtuals, I agree, it saves a lot of money. It saves a lot of time. It's the same for everybody. All those things are absolutely true. But boy, I miss having them in person, able to see, here's my lab. This is what it looks like. This is the things we have. This is what, our day-to-day sign out looks like. And, it's not something I can do otherwise. I have made an hour like video basically that doesn't actually walk around the lab, but it I talk through all the parts about the program and all those things and kind of try to discuss as much as I possibly can to let people kind of have the feeling of what it would be like. But people don't know what Danville's like unless you come here and see what Danville's like. you know, if you're somebody who like lived in a city your whole entire life, you might be in a shock, especially if you know, kind of get accepted and then finally show up on the day of your fellowship and say, oh, what did I get myself into here? You know, that part bothers me. So, but yes, we do it virtually because it's cost effective and it works and it's, you know, but I do miss that. And I also miss getting to I definitely get a flavor of people virtually for sure, but I like to see them across the microscope and see, you know, how that interaction goes because I need somebody to be smart. I need them to be good. I need them to be ambitious, but I also need them to be somebody I can, you know, talk with at the scope and a joke with and have a good time. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time with this person. So I need to make sure our personalities work out well because there's a lot of great candidates out there, but I just need to be able to get that better. And sometimes that's easier to do at the scope than it is, you know, virtually.
How about y'all, Rachel,
Yeah,
Catherine?
I was just gonna say the same thing. We went virtual and also are probably not going back either. And I agree with everything that's been said. It's cheaper. It's cost, you know, it's time effective. It saves time, but you don't get the full picture of what it's like to sit down with somebody, and that's just and I did go to Danville. And I did go to Danville and I came from Philadelphia and I was like, "Oh my goodness." But you know, yeah, but no, I mean, I would have, you know, it was great. But yeah, I and what about you, Dr. Flam and Dr. Chung? Are you guys still are what are you guys doing in your programs?
Yeah, we're continuing to do virtual. Like you said, I think that we found that, like you said, it's an easy way. Applicants don't have to, you know, fly across the country or spend a lot of money. But yes, there's pros and cons for this, and we see this with everything in terms of interviews going to virtual. And I think it's something that everyone has kind of struggled with in this post-COVID era is how to really optimize the interview process.
And Catherine, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, we're also virtual and probably will remain that way for the foreseeable future. But I echo everything Tammy said that there are some aspects about being in person. But one is sort of because I was down the street from Danville in Hershey for my fellowship, so I know that population 13,000, by the way, in Hershey. But you know, one of the things that I think about is being in Columbus. A lot of people think Midwest, and maybe it wouldn't be somewhere they would love to live, but it's a fabulous place to come and visit and be.
That's right. The
Yeah,
Midwest is awesome.
yeah. So from that aspect, I do miss having in-person things to kind of show people what we do have to offer.
All right, so now everybody's pretty much virtual, to our panelists, can you give some examples of good questions that applicants should be prepared to answer?
You know?
Why you want to do, oh, sorry, Dr. Messini, go
Oh,
ahead.
you go, because we don't really have like a stock questions.
I think just having, this may seem obvious, but why you want to do derm path and having like a very succinct, clear way to communicate that. Because you only have a short period of time with the people that you're interviewing with. So practicing and being able to say, this is why I want to do derm path. This is why I fell in love with it. You know, please take me, not in those exact words, but being able to do it quickly, but clearly.
And I think you should also do your homework about that particular program, like ask relevant questions about that specific program and show your interest in that program, the people out there, if there are any interest that matches with your interest. Like when I was applying, I was knowing I had to do a HEPATH fellowship before. So everywhere I went, I asked for like a CTCL person, if there was a CTCL clinic there, and if I could like talk to that person. So genuinely showing your interest, I think that really helps as well.
Yeah, I'd like to make sure that I see if there's any gaps in their CV, you know, what was that year, or why, you know, to explain what's going on. And most of the time it's just maybe I missed it or something like that whenever I was going through it. So I ask questions like that sometimes. I go back and forth between asking questions that are really not specific to anything, but more about, you know, how you're going to respond to something. How did you deal with this situation or that situation or something like that, just to kind of start a conversation. I don't always do that, but you know, we don't have a set of questions that we necessarily have. I mean, I've already like pretty extensively looked over people's, you know, CVs and their personal statements and their letters and things. So honestly, each person's questions are often very much related to that specific person rather than a general question for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I think we're at this point we're gonna transition on to Dr. Flam and talking about some other topics, perspectives of program directors, current fellows, and recent graduates. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. So I think, yeah, as we go to this last section before the Q&A, these are just some of these larger global look back questions. So I'm going to start by asking Dr. Messina and Dr. Feringer. This kind of goes with the questions we were just talking about. When you are looking for an applicant or looking for a fellow, what qualities are you looking for?
You know, I'm very mindful of the fact, like I mentioned before, that these applicants are very young in their careers, in their residency training. And I mean, although people have to give show convincing evidence of their passion for derm path, I'm just as impressed by people who have, you know, obviously taken advantage of every opportunity that they've had in their residency. Doesn't have to be in derm path, but get involved in as much teaching, abstract presentations, leadership positions, joining your professional organizations, being involved. Just, you know, a generally engaged resident is just as good as one who has 20 papers, if not better.
Yeah, I would say the similar things to what I mentioned earlier, that, you know, I want somebody to obviously be smart and capable of, you know, doing, because we have an arduous program. You know, I expect a lot from my fellows. And, you know, so they need to be able to do that kind of thing. And as I mentioned before, that I can relate to and that can talk with and enjoy time with, you know, that kind of thing is important. And I have to sense that the person really loves their derm path, because I love derm path, you know, and it's a passion for me. It's not work for me. It's just the way I love, you know, to do every day. And I like to see that type of thing. And I don't know how you can't say it. I just have to feel it. And I don't know how you get that across if that is your feeling, but that is something that I just have to pick up on, and that's important to me.
I know all you have to do. I did remember a question I always ask. Tell me about the most memorable case you've had in derm path. And you could totally tell by the way people talk about it, just get a feel for the way they just approach the whole science.
I
Me
like that
also,
question.
one thing, you know, I miss the in-person interviews just as much. One thing we do is convene all of the faculty and sort of have like a mini tumor board, and I ask everybody to bring like 2 cool cases they had the last week and show them on Zoom, and just to share, like, it's to give a flavor of what the wide breadth of our program, because we have 3 different institutions. And you can tell a lot by the way people interact. Like, we leave it open and all the applicants are in the same, you know, Zoom room, and that's, you know, it's another good way of seeing how their personality interactions.
That sounds fun. I want to go to this tumor board. Maybe I can get an invite. Maybe I should apply again. All right, next question is going to be for Dr. Whittington and Dr. Ahmed. So now you've been in practice for a bit. Looking back at your fellowship experience, is there anything that you would change about the program structure or how you approached the year?
I think if you would never see every single entity during your fellowship, but as much as I could see, I think that's what I really miss. That time that I wasted, I wish I would have like gone to the clinic, or I would have seen that case So that's what I think looking back. I did take notes during my fellowship, and I really found those helpful of those rare entities or those teaching tidbits that my program director would give during the scope. And I still sometimes go back to my notebook and look at those. So my advice would be try to see as many cases as possible, both in clinics and on the scope. And that will be really helpful.
I just want to echo what he said. You think it's a year is a long time when you start, but I promise you it's not. And it goes by so quickly. And I guess there wasn't really anything like that I would go back and change. I felt like I had a really good experience during fellowship, but just having the right mindset in general when you approach that 1 year and just say, okay, this may be like really, really early mornings, depending on when your program signs out and when you could preview, or it may be really late nights, but I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to be excited about it. I'm going to come to work and realize that at the end of this year, I'm going to be the one whose name is on the report. And I've only been doing this for a very short period of time, but I promise you, if you work your tail end off and you have a positive attitude, you will benefit from that, because it's really easy to get into the mindset like, oh, I'm just a fellow, you know, I just have to preview, but it doesn't really matter if I get the diagnosis right or wrong. But if you really put effort in, it will pay off, and you'll be very glad you did that when you get on the other side of fellowship.
They always say days are long, but years are short during training. So
that is a great way to put it. I'd say I think fellowship is what turned me into a morning person. I was not someone who liked to get up very early before. And it did also remind me what you were all talking about was something that I did during fellowship that I still remember was helpful, was that some of the cases I dictated and some of the phrasing that I got from my attendings I kept, and I found that really helpful when I was starting to sign out my own reports, because I'd be able to be like, oh gosh, how do I phrase this? Because I think that that's actually one of the more challenging things you sometimes come up against when you're attending for the first time is not the straightforward cases, but how are you going to word those trickier diagnoses or reports so that you can get across, you know, what you want to say without getting a whole slew of phone calls at the end of it is probably the best way to put it. All right, so then for our next set of questions, it's going to be for Dr. Khalil and Dr. Lee. So a similar look back. So looking back at that application process, applying, interviewing, you know, deciding on where to go, anything you'd change, any advice you'd want to give to those who are listening in?
Yeah, I think in terms of what kind of program works well for you, kind of similar to what Dr. Farringer had mentioned, I think there's a personality mesh that's very important. You're sitting with your attendings for hours out of the day. You don't get that kind of FaceTime with your attendings, I think, in any other specialty. Definitely, it was not like that in dermatology residency. In dermatology residency, you know, you'd exchange a couple of words outside of the actual patients that you're seeing with your attending, and then you know you move on to the rest of your day. Maybe your half day is a totally different area, but at the scope you're really working with them. So I think making certain that there's personality mesh work is important, and I think that that's valuable, and that's different for every person. The other thing that was really important for me, but again, I think that's very much like a person specific thing, and you should think of how you learn, is that I'm a person who learns with a lot of repetition and volume. And so that was really important to me, was to go to a place that did that had a lot of volume and had different attendings that were reading. So I was going to be able to learn different people's style. I didn't want to be learning from just one attending or have one attending that was reading the majority of the slides, and I was going to kind of just learn their system. I really wanted to learn from multiple attendings and to learn from just a lot of volume. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate to what extent that was important to me as a learner. But now in retrospect, I realized that not only was that really good for the way that I learn, and I appreciated that at the time, but it also lets you pick up these really bizarre cases, similar to what Dr. Ahmed just mentioned of keeping track of all these very rare entities that you end up running across maybe once over the course of your DermPath fellowship, where if your laboratory is seeing 200,000 specimens, you're much more likely to see those in that year, or you're likely to see more of those in that 1 year than if the fellowship has you looking at 10,000 specimens.
I love all of those points. I think that's a really, like, try to go to a big program. I think that was something I looked for when I chose my residency too, was to go to a big residency, because the more people you have, like, there's power in numbers, you know, you can always like leverage more people. And then, so I was gonna say something and it literally just escaped me.
But if I can comment something though, I just wanted to really emphasize that that's me stylistically saying that the big volume was important. I think that there are other learners who like I'm talking to a fellow that's at a different program that has smaller volume, and she was telling me that on every nevus that they look at, they'll spend 15 minutes studying it. And that's really important for her. And I think that if you're that kind of a learner, then that works really well. So I just wanted to mention that I don't think that going to a place that has a lot of volume is the right move. It was just the right move for me.
I get that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm like trying to think of when I remember what I was gonna say. So I think so I did a Surge Path fellowship before I did Derm Path, and one of the attendings that when I was in my Surge Path fellowship, you know, like we were just kind of talking, and like he brought up a really good point of when you're trying to pick your program of what fellowship you're going to go to, talk to as many people as you possibly can. Talk to the residents who are there at that program now that you might want to apply to a fellowship for. And in his words, he was like, it's kind of like spying, but we don't call it that, okay? We can't call it spying, but you got to really network and reach out to like maybe someone you know now is at that institution. Try to talk to them and see what it's like on the inside, because you may get one, you know, you don't always get 100% through like an interview. You may not be able to have the opportunity to go do an away there. So then in that case, you know, talking to the people who are there now, getting to know like, oh, how is the program run? Is it like just networking and meeting people at conferences so that you have a little bit more one-on-one time. Like, yeah, I think that is something that would be my advice.
No, so this is all excellent advice. So at this point, I'm going to transition to the Q&A. I'd say this is Q&A for everyone, moderators included. So Dr. Cole, Dr. Chung, if you want to chime in, let me know. I saw that some people are already hard at work answering some of these. Thanks for that. All right, so I'm just going to start with the first question I see is, do you recommend having letters of recommendation sent from a third party, like a program coordinator who compiles the letters of recommendation, or is it more convenient to have the applicant send the letters of recommendation themselves? Any thoughts on this one?
Oh, I think that most letter writers that you request would want to send the letter themselves. I believe a letter that comes straight from the applicant has a little bit of less, you know, it's there's always a worry that it might not be 100% objective because they know the applicant saw it. So most letter writers will send them themselves. I think when you have letter writers that you're gonna invite, you give them the list of the programs and the contact names at the time of requesting them and have them send them.
Yeah, our program coordinator for our dermatology and our pathology programs have accumulated letters of recommendation for people to send to another program, you know, for an application. So that's coming from the program coordinator didn't necessarily have to ever have been seen by the resident that's applying themselves. So yeah, I agree. I agree with Jane. You know, I'd say getting them there on time is most important thing, but yeah, I think most people are going to prefer to see them coming more direct, either from the person themselves, the staff person themselves, or their coordinator.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Also, in terms of applications, couple of questions coming in about tips for personal statements, differences for path or derm trained, or any samples anyone knows about.
I would say one thing for sure, don't use Chat GPT. Make it yourself. Make it
Can you
you.
tell?
No, please, please, please don't use any artificial intelligence because it'll get figured out.
I think it can be short, it doesn't have to be long, but genuine, and that shows your interest, what you want to do, what you want to do after the fellowship, what you're going to bring before the fellowship. I think all those points, if you compile them, you can easily write a concise personal statement that gives a brief overview of you to the program.
Yeah, I mean, it is your one chance. It is one of your chances to also explain your interest in derm path. So that definitely definitely want to have that in there.
I actually had this talk with a medical student applying for derm residency today. So it's a little different, but basically, how should I go about writing my personal statement? And like Dr. Messina said, it is a really important piece of paper or paragraph that you're writing about yourself, and you have to be able to communicate that well and concisely, making sure that you don't write it the night before you turn it in, because people, after they read hundreds of personal statements, they can tell whether you put it together sloppily the night before or whether you put effort into it. So, I remember going through the process, and I actually rewrote it many, many times and had sent it to trusted friends to kind of get an objective outside person to proof my grammar, like basic things like that. You don't want to send in a personal statement with misspelled words. But just putting a little bit of effort into it and not doing it the night before, I think will also help.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really great points. So really practical tips. Please don't make it more than a page. I know that I don't want to read anything more than a page, and I know that you can all do things very concisely. Like I said, no spelling errors, no grammatical errors. That's, we look for precision. And so if we see that, I think that we all get concerned, like you said, either written the night before or no attention to detail. And then try to find a story that speaks to you and try to put something in the personal statement we wouldn't get out of an interview question necessarily or in the application. It's a good place to highlight that extra dimension of why you'd be a good fit for a specific program.
Yeah, I would second that. Some of the things that people have written in their personal statements that have stood out to me are things about that sort of have nothing to do with necessarily derm path, but something else about their past or their experiences that has brought them to this place. So those things, like for example, I read like someone trained as a dancer, and I was like, wow, that's a really disciplined person. Like things that from the outside that sort of speak to different parts of their personality, not necessarily, everybody loves derm path, we all love it, but something else that kind of is like, oh yeah, that's really interesting, something else about their personality or their interests that have brought them to the application process, but not necessarily why they love derm path so much. So
All right, I think then here's maybe more of a straightforward yes or no question that Dr. Messina or Dr. Farringer may know. Is there somewhere on the ASDP website that would show which programs accept international applicants?
No,
I
with
don't think
the ASDP website has well, as of next week, it'll have all the names of the programs that are going to participate in the timeline, and there's also a link to all the ACGME accredited derm path fellowships, including an email contact in their website. So really, it's a lot of work, but you would have to go to the website of the programs that you're interested in applying to see if that information is on there.
But that's a good idea, something for us to think about. It's hard to police it and to keep it up to date, accurate at all times, because there's not a place that that collects all that data. Like ACGME has, the fellowships are either accredited or not accredited at all times. You can go and look at that, but it's not like that with the international. They may be accepting now, not accepting at another time. They may drop in, drop out, and it's hard to keep an active, accurate list of that. But that would be a nice idea to have that someplace.
Yeah. All right, and then now this is one we haven't talked about that I think is a great one. So, uh, can you talk a little bit about how programs help their fellows find work after fellowship, knowing that sometimes it can be hard to find a job in derm path, especially with if you have certain other parameters or expectations?
I can say that for my fellows that I've had, sometimes they already come pre-knowing where they're going. They already have made a deal someplace, you know, that I'm coming back there to do it. So sometimes that's the case. But you know, a lot of it is word of mouth. And I think the ASDP has done a great job in the last couple years with, and yeah, I'm biased, you know, but they have been doing a really great job, I think, with the career center that's there with the different opportunities are out there and people are using it. So that has a lot of good information, but there's always ones going on that are kind of like under the radar, so to speak, that maybe don't even get officially ever posted any place. So, you know, as a fellowship director, we hear from each other's fellowships, you know, all the time, and other programs and things. People, you know, that I know are sending me message, hey, we're hiring in Tennessee, we're looking to hire in, you know, wherever, and do you know anybody? So I always forward those things to my fellows, you know, that aren't already committed to someplace. And I, you know, definitely if I see one on the ASDP website or something that is posted that I'm like, hey, this is the job I would have took, you know, this is one I would have liked to work with these people. I certainly tell my fellows that as well. So yeah, and as far as, you know, I've had ones that have wanted very regionally specific, and that's probably the hardest thing because, you know, it depends on what that region is you're looking for. It might be an easy area, but it might be a more difficult area. So I'd recommend being a little open, you know, about your first position and, you know, see the world and that all that kind of stuff, and be a little bit open also to the combination because some people have in their mind, you know, this is what I want. I want half a day of this and half a day of that every day of the week. Well, you know what? I wanted that. I got that when I started. I got lucky, but that wasn't right for me. You know, the right thing for me was doing almost all derm path. So, you know, be open and find out what's right, you know, as far as the combination of things.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. So I just went through that about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, trying to figure out where I was gonna end up. And I'm at IU right now, which is great. My mentors really encouraged me to keep an open mind. And again, if you, like Dr. Farringer mentioned, if you have like certain parameters that you know you have to kind of play by, like you have family in a certain area, or you have kids, you know, that's something to think about. But I just tried to keep an open mind, and I interviewed in academic places and private practice places just to get a feel for, because you never really know if you go in with a narrow mindset, it's easy to miss out on opportunities that maybe you didn't know are actually a really great fit for you. So that's kind of how it happened. I used the ASDP career resource, and also used path outlines, and then again word of mouth from my mentors. So I think again, as a fellow, and then you're the one that's going out to look for jobs, keeping an open mind. And then again, just making sure that you're not prematurely excluding options that again may be your perfect fit.
I think you just wanted to hang out with me. You know what I mean?
I got really lucky in that regard because Dr. Cal's office is like right next door to mine. So I get to see her every day.
I think one of the things that's an advantage about derm path is that we're still a pretty small specialty, and a lot of us know each other. And I think it behooves, you know, new fellows to have the conversation with their program director early on. What do they prefer? Do they only want academics or private, or are they undecided? Because they're small. You have one fellow. There's opportunities to sort of customize their experience to strengthen them for whatever role they might take. And we all have contacts, and I think that's part of our program director responsibility is to leverage those if the fellow wants that.
Yeah, I think the one other just piece of advice I'd say for someone who's about to start fellowship is don't be afraid to have that conversation early. Just because, like you said, if there's a specific type of practice or a geographic location that you want to be at, you want to make sure that you can have as many advocates available for you earlier rather than later, because sometimes the process can stretch to be a couple of months or more, and it's something you don't want to have to stress about as you get towards the end of the year. Okay, so we are at 9 o'clock. I think we got through a good chunk of these questions. I want to thank all of our panelists and moderators, not only for answering the questions live, but for typing all of these answers. This will be recorded as well, and I believe will be available on the ASDP website. So if there's anything you want to go back to, or if there's anyone else you think may want to listen to this, please let them know. But I want to thank everyone again, and have a great night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.